Hey guys, it's Anna. Welcome back to another Thursday on my channel, which means another new video. And today you are getting two videos. Earlier this morning, I finished reading American Gods by Neil Gaiman, and so this is going to be my day that I review it on my booktube channel. This is the first time that I've ever done a book review in video format, so I'm a little rusty on how to do it. So please forgive me if the video is a little odd in some parts. I'm trying my best. This is the discussion video though, so this will be chock full of spoilers. So if you have not read American Gods, I will leave the little eye in one of the corners and you can go watch that one instead. Those of you who have read American Gods though, stay tuned because I'm going to get a little in depth with some plot points of the novel and some just general things about the novel that I want to discuss with people. So because this is my first book review, I actually took notes on what I wanted to talk about. So if you see me reading anything, it's because I am reading the document on my computer. I will say that overall I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, and this is definitely one of my favorite books now of all time. Neil Gaiman is definitely one of my favorite authors now. And there is a lot to talk about in this book. These aren't even all the annotations I had at first. Like, I actually went through and kind of cut down on some of the annotations. Yeah, so a lot to talk about. But if I talked about everything that I liked about this novel, or just everything in general that I found striking about it, this video would be an eternity long. So instead, I picked some parts that I thought were the most interesting to talk about, and so I'm going to talk about those with you. So part one, I'm going to talk about the characters. I'm just going to go through the list of characters and give you my thoughts on each one. So let's start with Wednesday. I disliked Wednesday because he was seemingly written to be disliked. So I liked him, but I also disliked him. I disliked him because he seemed very shady. He just did not seem like he really had Shadow's best interest in mind, and I felt like Wednesday was not doing all he could to protect Shadow, even though he dragged him into this. Upon reading the ending of the novel, I understand why, but that was my general thought process during the first part of this novel. Somehow though, I was still able to get so attached to Wednesday without realizing it that I actually felt pain when he died. But I think part of the reason that I felt so attached to Wednesday was just because I was attached to Shadow since he was the main character, and Shadow was very attached to Wednesday. So I'm gonna move on to what I thought about Shadow Moon, our main character. At first, I thought Shadow was going to be kind of like a Gary Sue character, but he shocked me, I guess would be the correct word for it. His character development throughout the novel ended up being very strong. As he got more and more involved in the War of the Gods, I could see more of his personality shining through, and it occurred to me that while I thought that he should be big and tough and strong because he was in prison, he really wasn't. He was gentle-hearted and very kind and level-headed, but at the same time he was also big and tough. So it's like he could beat up someone if he needed to, and he could do all the physical, like, macho man stuff if he really needed to, but he never felt the need to most of the time, you know? And I respected that about him. There are a couple moments in the novel that I highlighted that really showcase how Shadow's character was that I enjoyed, like when he first meets Sam Blackcrow and they go to the diner and he purposely rigs the coin toss so that he has to pay for her dinner, and he doesn't tell her about it. He's just paying for her because he thinks that she needs the help. And it's not like he really has that much money throughout the novel. I mean, Wednesday's like providing money for him, but at the same time he's kind of fending for himself through most of it. So I just thought that was like a very sweet thing for Shadow to do, and I really liked that part of his character. Another moment in the novel was when he's talking to Lara in the cemetery in Lakeside, and Lara is talking about what it is truly to be alive. This topic comes up right after the discussion of her cheating on Shadow with Robbie, but she's basically saying that Shadow has never felt alive, and Shadow is very obviously hurt by this, and that just made me feel for him because I am also a very sensitive person, and so the fact that we have like a big rough and tough main character, or at least he seems like he would be at the very beginning, and he ends up being a very sensitive and just very empathetic character really struck me, and I really appreciated that about him. Because a lot of the times with novels, if a character is described as being a very tall, very big guy, he usually has these stereotypical characteristics to go along with that. And Shadow does not have many of those, and I appreciated that. Moving on to Laura, I didn't know how to feel about her at first. I thought she was just going to be a minor character who kind of appeared randomly because A, I didn't expect her to come back from the dead at all, and B, when she came back a couple times from the dead, I was like, there's no way that she's going to play a big integral part in the storyline. But she does. She saves Shadow from Mr. Wood and Mr. Stone, I believe, and that part I was like, oh, okay, you know, that's nice, but I didn't really think anything about it. But toward the end, when she is hitchhiking and she's picked up by Mr. Town and she plays him and then she kills him, and then later she gets to Eagle Rock and she kills Loki / Mr. World, I really started to appreciate her character more because it made me feel like she actually did love Shadow despite all the shit that she did to him. I was originally inclined to dislike her because I do not condone cheating, so I did not like her because she did cheat on her partner, but at the same time, the reason that she cheated is one that you have to feel a little sympathetic with. Her husband was in jail, and even though that's not a reason to cheat at all ever, you you kind of feel bad for Lara because she was also affected by Shadow being in jail. And I feel bad even saying that I empathize with her at all because it's still a horrible thing to do to your partner. And obviously the way Shadow reacts to it shows how horrible it is, but something about the way that Gaiman wrote Lara into the storyline kind of made you feel sympathetic for her. Then at the end when she kills everybody to try to get back at them for hurting her husband, it really does show that she still cares about Shadow. So I appreciated that as well, and I thoroughly enjoyed end of the book Lara compared to beginning of the book Lara. You might be able to say that she became more fleshed out as more of her flesh came off because, you know, she's dead and she's rotting. Bad joke, I know. The next character I'm going to talk about, I already talked a little bit about, and that is Sam Black Crow. I know that she's not a main character by any means. She's definitely one of my favorite characters in this entire novel. I absolutely loved her, and in my opinion, she is the strongest female character. I love that when you first meet her, she's just hitchhiking, she's a free spirit. She explains her story to Shadow, and she still has like a good lighthearted sense of humor about it. She talks about, I believe, her father pretty much disowning her, and then she makes a joke about how he opened a knockoff Taco Bell called Taco Bell's, and everything about her from that moment really stood out in my mind. And so when I got to the part where Shadow is in Lakeside pretending to be Mike Ansel and his neighbor ends up being related to Sam and he meets Sam again, I was so thrilled because Sam is one of my favorite characters, as I said. Just really love her. Sam is also bisexual, so it was nice to have some representation within the LGBT community. Next, I'm going to talk about Chernabog. I think I'm saying his name correctly. I have no clue how to pronounce it. Mr. Ibis, Mr. Jackal, Mad Sweeney, Mr. Nancy, all of like the gods that are kind of sub-characters that are still very much reoccurring and still kind of main characters. They were definitely my favorite group of characters in the whole thing, like especially Mr. Ibis, Mr. Jackal, Mr. Nancy, and Chernabog. Just my favorites. I loved them a lot. Mad Sweeney was okay. I mean, he wasn't in the novel that much, but I do appreciate him nonetheless. But as I said, those characters are my favorites. I was just very interested in learning more about them because I don't know anything about their pantheons and I don't know really anything about them as gods. In fact, I had to Google who Chernabog was after the book was over because I wanted to learn more about him since I had never heard of him before. And same with Mr. Nancy, I had to look up more about him as well because I didn't know anything about him, and it was interesting to learn more about new gods that I had never heard of. I also like them because I got very attached to them, and they all seemed, minus Mad Sweeney, to treat Shadow more like a son than Wednesday actually did. And the last little group of characters that I'm going to talk about are all the new gods. So that's like Technical Boy, the Misters, who I think are technically called Black Hats. I'm not sure, but like Mr. Town, Mr. Stone, Mr. World, all of those people. And then Media. I just thought that was very interesting, and it was just such a smart idea to take consumerism and all the things that Americans specifically hold in such high regard and put on like a godlike pedestal and include them as godlike figures in this novel. I just thought that was very smart, and I appreciated them for that element. And at the same time, they were absolutely infuriating, like especially Technical Boy. Like, I really love him as a character. He's definitely my favorite of the new gods just because he's so out there, but at the same time, he's so representative of what he's supposed to represent. The second part of this review, I'm going to talk about the plot twists that happen. There were quite a few that happened within this novel, and so I'm just going to kind of talk about them in chronological order and give my thoughts and opinions on them. So the first major plot twist that comes to mind is Wednesday dying, and I did not expect this at all. In fact, when I read it, I was absolutely blindsided. I should have seen it coming because we had Bilquis die and we had Mad Sweeney die, and so it was just setting the stage for a bigger and more important god's death. More important meaning just a more major character. But I still did not see it coming. I did not expect it to be Wednesday ever in a million years, and yet it was. The next plot twist I'm going to talk about involves Loki Lysmith going from just being the cellmate that Shadow has to being Loki the god and then working with the new gods, which obviously he's not really working with the new gods, but at this point in time, I did not know that. I was not totally shocked by his reappearance because when I thought back about it, I was like, there's no way that he's not going to come back and be Loki because his name is Loki Lysmith, so he's gotta be Loki. You've already got the Norse pantheon in the play, so I figured he would come back at some point. I just did not expect him to be on the other side. Well, other side, but then again, at this point in time, I thought that was the other side. But that being said, even though I did not predict it, I didn't really get shocked by it. I kind of just accepted it, and I was like, oh, you know, it's kind of weird that he's not working with Odin, even though Odin's technically the All-Father, so he'd be Loki's dad, but I just went with it. That being said, when the major twist happened, and it's revealed that Loki is Mr. World, and that Wednesday is actually just working with Loki to cause all these gods to kill each other and fight uselessly so that they are able to get power through bloodshed and chaos. I was genuinely shocked. Like, I had to go back and reread a couple pages to make sure I did not miss anything and that what I was reading was for real. Learning Wednesday's genuine cause to get all the gods rallied up and fight, and then the real reason why he allowed himself to die, I was absolutely appalled, I guess is the word, but appalled means like a bad context, so I was just shocked immensely. I honestly cannot think of the last time I was that surprised by a book. And I know this kind of came before the last plot twist I was talking about, but when it is revealed that Wednesday is Shadow's dad, this did not shock me. I kind of saw it coming a couple chapters earlier. My thoughts on this were, I thought maybe Gaiman is gonna write this into it, and then I thought maybe he won't, and I kind of hoped he wouldn't, but alas, he did. It just seemed like a very convenient setup because Shadow is fatherless, and they talk about that quite a lot, so I just thought that would kind of be like a cop-out if Neil Gaiman did that. But the way that it ended up all working out, and the fact that Shadow wasn't just like, oops, I accidentally knocked up a mortal woman, and it was more like, I'm gonna knock up this woman so I have a son that later I can force to help me pit all the gods against each other. I enjoyed the fact that it was more of a setup than like an actual moment of love on Wednesday's part. That seems to fit his character a lot more. Then, of course, there is a plot twist of sorts on the very last page of the novel. Very last page. But this is part 3 and the last part of my review that I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to discuss the ending of the novel and how Wednesday is not actually Odin. So the ending makes it slightly ambiguous on who Wednesday actually is, especially when Shadow goes to Iceland and he meets Odin himself, and Odin says that Wednesday, quote, was me, yes, but I am not him. So at first I was a little confused by this, and I kind of understood what Odin was trying to say here, that Wednesday was him, but kind of just like an extension of himself, and I wasn't really sure how to articulate it, so I talked a little bit about it with my boyfriend, who apparently somehow knows the entire plot of American Gods. Like, I don't know if he read it, I have no clue. And by it, I mean a synopsis, because I don't think he would read this. And after a couple minutes of discussion, I finally figured out how to put this into words, so I'm going to try my best with that. Wednesday is Odin, but Odin is not Wednesday, because Wednesday is the Americanized form of Odin. I know it's a little confusing, but trek with me here, I'm gonna explain it. So a big theme within this novel is immigration. The moving of people from other countries into America, because that is a very integral part of America's culture and background, and just America's general makeup as a country. And with these immigrants came their beliefs, their culture, their customs, and their gods. And this last part is specifically key for this because of what the book is talking about. We see this theme of immigration and of people and their gods coming over to America through various different forms in the book. Quite a few characters say some iteration of the phrase, "This is not a land for gods." And we also see this theme of immigration of both humans and gods through various passages throughout the novel. And those passages I'm talking about are the ones where they talk about various people coming to America that aren't related necessarily to the main storyline, but they give extra context to the novel. So for example, early on in the book, we get a passage about a woman named Essie Tregowan. Essie travels to America from England during the colonization of the New World in 1721. This story is told to Shadow in the context of Mr. Ibis's journal, I believe, and he talks about like all her crimes that she committed. She was a prostitute, she was a con artist, and it talks about her problems with being both in America and England. But the end of the passage about Essie is the main part that I want to focus on here. Because at the end, a man who is described as having a moon face approaches her just as she is about to die, and they have a discussion. And in this discussion, the man says, quote, "It was you that brought me here, you and few like you, into this land with no time for magic and no time for piskies and such folk." In this passage, the moon-faced man, who is very obviously some sort of god or spirit or folklore legend of some sort, tells her that she brought him here, which is the main part of this that I wanted to take away. It ties into the immigration of both people and gods. Which, side note, when I did a Wikipedia search of the year 1721 just to make sure I had like my timeline straight, within the first sentence of the Wikipedia page, it has the word Wednesday. And I was like, is this a coincidence? Because after reading this novel, I don't know if I believe in coincidence anymore. Going back to the passages though, another example in the book happens later, and that is when it is talking about Watutu. I believe that's how you say her name. If not, then I absolutely apologize. But it is the story of Watutu and her twin brother, and they're coming to America involuntarily by slave trade. In this passage, we see the gods both coming to America with Watutu and her brother, as well as working through them. For example, in the part of her passage where the man threatens to rape her, she tells him, quote, "If you put it in me down there, I will bite you off with my teeth down there. I am a witch girl and I have very sharp teeth down there." And while the threat works, she immediately tells the audience, well, she doesn't really tell the audience, but the narrator tells the audience her inner thoughts, and she's definitely thinking, I am not the one who said that. It was Alegba, who I might also be mispronouncing the name of, but he's the trickiest of gods, and he spoke through her. So you see the gods kind of working through these people as they're coming to America. Also, within that passage, I just wanted to point this out too, because it also is kind of involved in this topic. I mentioned the term Americanization earlier of Wednesday and how he's like the Americanized form of Odin. And in this passage, we see like another example of Americanization, so I just wanted to throw that out there as well. And that is when Watutu is older and she is talking to, I believe the girl's name is like the widow Paris, and she's showing this girl all of the things that she has done within her culture, and she's telling her about her gods. This woman later becomes Marie Laveau, and if you do not know who that is, she's a very prominent figure in voodoo, I guess, in New Orleans. She's more of like a tourist attraction now, I believe, but within this novel, she is an American woman, or at least a woman who has been more Americanized than Watutu. She's taking the culture that Watutu has and all of these beliefs and Americanizing them by making them commercial and making money off of them, which admittedly is a very American thing to do. So, Anna, you've explained all of that, but what does that have to do with Odin and Wednesday? And what exactly do you mean by Americanization? So I'm going to start off with the last part of that question first. When I say that something is Americanized, I mean one of two things. The first being that it is just any bit of a culture that is from another country that has been altered in some way in order to fit in with American standards more. And I'm also referring to the idea of American culture coming from all of these other cultures that people brought with them when they immigrated to America. Because American culture, especially then, more so than now, is definitely just a conglomerate of other countries' cultures mixed together, because America is just a giant melting pot. And on top of the cultures coming from immigrants, you also have the culture of the Native American tribes that were here before anyone came. So it's just more of a melting pot in that way. And you can kind of see like this idea of the melting pot of cultures and like all the cultures kind of mashing together to form one American culture, and the way that all the gods from the other pantheons worship Wednesday as the All-Father. Because if they were still in their home countries, Anubis wouldn't have any clue who Odin is, and he wouldn't care about Odin, you know? But because they're in America, Mr. Jackal and all of them care about who Wednesday is. So on to the main part of this entire section of the review, and that is how Wednesday cannot be Odin. Wednesday cannot be Odin because he is merely an incarnation of Odin. Wednesday is the ideal form of Odin that was made and kind of shaped by Icelandic immigrants that came to America and adopted American ways. So Wednesday is Odin, but Odin is not Wednesday, because Odin is still the truest form of himself. He is like the original god that the original Icelandic Norse people worshipped. So he is the closest to the mythology-based god as you can get. And Wednesday is like the American form of him, which really, that being said, all of the gods that you meet in American Gods are just American versions of the original gods. And that explains why Wednesday is like so obsessed with like traditionally American things, namely sex. That's like his biggest vice that I can think of. And also just being a con man in general. Greed and consumerism seems to be something that is associated mostly with America. And Wednesday, even though he seemingly is trying to combat that with the new gods, he's also partaking in it. And then you have Odin, who you only get to see parts of when Shadow is talking to him in Iceland. Odin is enthralled by like a simple coin trick that Shadow has been doing to literally everyone in the entire novel. And that stood out in my mind because it really showed that Odin, because he's still in Iceland and he's not in America, would not have any clue as to like what leprechaun tricks are. But Wednesday did because of the whole American conglomerate culture thing that I was just talking about. After saying all of that, I really don't have a wrap up for it. It's just I kind of word vomited all this information. So that is it for this video. Like I said at the beginning, this is the first review I've ever done video format wise, so it might be a little choppy. I know this ending is probably like very abrupt, but just roll with it. If you want to know my overall thoughts on the book instead of just specific things that I had to say about specific parts, then go check out the spoiler-free review because I give a general synopsis on there. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like, and if you are new here and have not already subscribed, please do so. It really helps me out. I will see you on Tuesday with another new video. Bye.